So when we talk about mobility, possibility, the legitimacy of the system, education plays a very important role. Now, you're an educator, a university professor at a public institution. You talk in your book very intensively and very passionately about how neoliberalism has transformed the nature of education and what people are aspiring to, and also, as a side effect, what kind of possibilities exist for people in the lower rungs to rise up. How does this manifest?
There's a very long story here, and I'll try to make it reasonably brief. I think it's important to start with a recognition that one of the extraordinary things that the United States did in the 20th century was expand public higher education in ways that were just unimaginable from another time and from any other place in terms of how many people had access to it and what it was trying to do. And what I mean is, especially in the post-war period, the amount of money, federal and state money, invested in public higher education, combined with the GI Bill, combined with the opening of doors to women and to others who had heretofore been excluded from higher education, especially racial minorities, but also working class whites. What this did was essentially make the United States a model for the world. And I rarely speak about the US this way because it was a century that was also dreadful in other ways for the United States in terms of imperial things and in terms of many other endeavors. But on higher education, it was truly a model and a golden age. And essentially, what that period involved was making high quality public higher education available to any qualified high school student by making it pretty close to free. And the example I'll offer is my own. When I went to the University of California in the early 70s, the cost was about $600 a year. That was tuition and fees. And the cost of room and board was another couple of thousand. I was able, as a student who did not get support from parents, from a family, to be able to take a part-time job and thrive at the University of California. That's no longer possible for a variety of reasons. The total the total state support now for the University of California hovers around 12% of its budget. And the rest of the budget comes from tuition and from private donors. What has this done to education? That's the important question. What has it actually done to both the research component and the education component of our public research universities? One thing it's done, of course, is make education increasingly contoured toward the question of return on investment. That is, very few students of working class or let alone poor or even middle class means can look at a college education, as we did in my time, your time, as something that has to do with expanding your capacities as a human being and your capacities as a citizen. Instead, the question is, how much money do you put in for how much you will get out as a potentially higher earner at the other end? Now that in turn has a tremendous effect on education itself. When you're asking how much do I put in for how much I might get out, instead of courses that expand the mind, the soul, the character, the citizen capacities of our students, increasingly the demand by students, by their families, by our administrators, is to provide really high-level vocational education, not courses that either steep you in the histories, geographies, cultures of the world, or literatures, arts, and so forth of our past and present and possible future, but technical educations, especially in what are called the STEM fields, science, technology, engineering, and math, And even in the social sciences and the humanities, the question is always, what does this do? What does this contribute to one's earning capacity at the other end? So everything has to be justified in terms of that earning capacity. And what does that mean? That thousands of years of Western civilization priding itself on developing culture, arts, and the human being itself, and producing and reproducing and advancing that through higher education, is essentially being thrown aside in favor of higher education as an economic machine to produce a higher value of human capital at the end than it had at the beginning. Now, I wouldn't argue against paying any attention to the question of what somebody might do with a college education. I think it's a fine question. It's been asked forever. But to compress education to the question of one's economic value and to transform everything about higher education such that that becomes the concern has revolutionized what universities are. So the transformation of public universities into essentially private universities with a little bit of public funding has not just made them more expensive. It's not just increased the debt burden on students. Both of those have happened. It's not just deterred many students from even considering college. That has happened. It's also transformed what universities themselves are from places where society, culture, citizenship, and democracy are produced, and transform them instead into economic machines for producing human capital at the other end. That's the education end. Now I'll just say a little bit about research. We have a tremendous number of problems in society, ranging from global warming to healthcare to particular problems of crime and poverty and so forth. And we could say these are problems that have global implications. They also often have local and national and regional ones. Once research in universities is almost fully funded by corporations, by private donors, and by funds that in one way or another are attached to economic outcomes, it becomes harder and harder to research what we could call public problems with public solutions. And we see this in climate change. One place we really see it clearly is in healthcare. I'll give you a concrete example. There is far more funding at the Harvard University School of Medicine for drugs related to insomnia and anxiety than anything related to Ebola or HIV/AIDS. The greatest health crises in our world today pertain to HIV and Ebola. The greatest profit can be made in coming up with the best anti-insomnia drug and best anti-anxiety drug for whom? We know who it's for.
Just listening to you makes me more anxious.
Of course it does.
The demand for those
but
markets just
I'll
increased.
wrap this up now. So that's just one tiny example
Yeah.
of what happens, how not just the question of how we educate, what courses we offer, what our majors are like, what students are allowed to or encouraged to pursue once you privatize higher education, but also what has happened to the public research dimension of universities. And increasingly what universities are now as research institutes is inexpensive, mildly publicly subsidized research arms for corporations. You see this in agribusiness, you see it in health, you see it in a variety of other domains.
And as a result, markets notoriously underprovide public goods.
Exactly.
So the quality of democracy or the spectrum of research agendas that, quote, can be afforded
Exactly.
does not include what you might call the calculus of the public good. It relies on the monetary return.
Exactly.
And the cost
Or
benefit
it
analysis.
relies on the question of Yes, exactly. I'll leave it at that.